Thank you all for coming. We've decided to bring some industry professionals who have experience in cybersecurity here today to talk to us about their career journeys and their career paths and what some opportunities you might have to be able to enter into careers in cybersecurity or information systems. I just wanted to start out by saying thank you for coming and taking your time to be with me. I know the paths that you've been on are interesting to me. I'm really passionate about how we continue to build more women in IT. I actually just finished my doctoral dissertation on just this topic. I was so happy to be able to spend 4 years studying how we continue to bring more women into family wage jobs that are going to impact the future of our economy. And so I feel really privileged to be here. So thank you for taking the time. So what we're going to do to get started is I just would love it if you would each, we'll go and each of you introduce yourself. So Jamila, would you be willing to start?
I'm Jamila Kaya. I currently work for Microsoft as a threat intelligence analyst. And I had gone to school at Whatcom Community College through their AAST program for cybersecurity.
Awesome.
Hi, I'm Emily Hacker. I am also at Microsoft as a threat intelligence analyst.
Oh, great. Would one of you want to share what led you into a career in cybersecurity?
So it was mostly an accident for me. So growing up, I was always kind of the family tech support specialist and getting everything plugged in and fixing everything, getting the internet working again. So I was kind of, as a kid, I always grew up just tinkering with stuff to make things work. So modding video games and everything else, but I never really considered it kind of a career. It was just a fun thing that I did. And so growing up, I actually had ended up dropping out of high school and went to work making eyeglasses in an eyewear manufacturer. Mm-hmm. I had been laid off from that job and was eligible to go back to school for an in-demand field through the Trade Act program, mm-hmm. Which the Workforce Development Department helped connect me with basically applicable programs at community colleges nearby that were for in-demand fields and that would get me a degree within 2 years. And so I had actually had a counselor recommend to me the cybersecurity program, which was very recent. And at first I thought this was just a job. I wouldn't like it very much because I didn't think I was very qualified to do it. I didn't think I had experience, but I started the program, found out that I really enjoyed it. And it was just kind of smooth sailing from there in terms of, I just applied myself to learning all I could about it and was really excited to learn more about it. And then I went straight from kind of graduating to working in the field.
That's great.
I also kind of ended up in cybersecurity by accident. So I went to Texas A&M University. I just recently moved to Washington. And I have a degree in English and communication. I went to school to be a newspaper reporter, which I did very, very briefly, and then discovered that it was not exactly what I thought it was going to be. It didn't really pay what I thought I could live off of, and it ended up not being the career that I wanted. So I got a job as a technical writer, where I was writing software manuals. And I had a good friend who I had worked with at that job, who got a job at Lockheed Martin doing technical writing for an intelligence team, and she recruited me to go over there. So I started out in cybersecurity as a technical writer. So what I was doing was writing the reports for a team of intelligence analysts and editing their reports and making their PowerPoint presentations and stuff like that. I found it all very interesting, but I, was the technical writer, so I wasn't really doing the day-to-day work. But as I settled into the role a little bit more, I kept kind of picking up more and more of what my teammates were doing. I would ask them like, hey, like, can I help you on that one thing? Like, can you show me how to do it? Like, et cetera, et cetera. And eventually I was picking up whole projects from them and kind of inserting myself into their position a little bit just because I was really interested in it. And eventually got to the point where I was just doing their job full time and my job full time because I thought it was cool and I wanted to do it. And my company took note of that and they promoted me to be an intelligence analyst full time. And that's how I got into cybersecurity. So kind of by accident, kind of just by picking up the skills on the job and having really good coworkers who were willing to train me. So I lucked out. And now, like I said, I'm still an intelligence analyst and I love it a lot, and I'm glad I ended up here.
That's great. Thank you. Jamila, did you attend any of the conferences while you were a student at Whatcom?
I attended a few conferences. I don't believe that I attended any of the WESIS conferences, but I did attend some of the conferences for cybersecurity and education, as well as the ICMCP National Conference for the International Consortium for Minorities in Cybersecurity during my time at Whatcom as well. And that was a great networking opportunity in order to meet more people and also hear about the different jobs that there are. I think a lot of people going into, especially in cybersecurity for the first time, can feel like there's maybe only two options for them. And so I think that it's definitely one of the good parts about going to networking events or conferences is that you get to meet people in the field and hear about a wide variety of skills and jobs and how they overlap, so that you have a better picture of what's out there. Because I think definitely if you're thinking about going to college for cybersecurity, or you're thinking about a career change or something like that, you might think like, oh, I only have the option between like pen testing or red teaming and blue teaming, and there's a whole swath of not only other colors, purple and green teaming and etc., but lots of other job titles and skills as well. So that was one of the good things about doing that while going to school and research ahead of time.
And how did you find your job at Microsoft?
So I didn't start at Microsoft. Once I graduated, I actually worked at a local energy company, Puget Sound Energy for those in the region. And I worked as a network engineer first. So my job was a lot more oriented towards operational kind of network infrastructure and security engineering, making sure that things like the VPNs, the firewalls, the routers, the endpoint protection, that was all configured properly and up and running. And it was there that I kind of got given more or less a compliance task to do threat hunting, and that kind of, and for those that aren't familiar with that word, because it's a kind of like flashy word, it mostly just means like you're looking through log data for threats that weren't caught by your other technologies. So things that might not have been caught by antivirus or something like that, but it's still in the environment, it still might be affecting computers. So I started doing that, and eventually they said, you know, well, you're really good at that part. So I then transitioned into doing threat hunting full-time for the organization. And after a few years in that, I decided to look outside of the organization as well and applied for Microsoft, and landed at Microsoft doing a very similar thing.
That's great. So what do you enjoy most about your job, Jamila?
So for me, I know like I really enjoy solving mysteries, which is a vague statement, but I enjoy solving mysteries with the data too. Like I enjoy looking at it, I enjoy kind of picking out patterns in it. But I think someone told me a while ago that like it's kind of like writing stories with data. So even though you're writing hard data, you kind of have to explain it to everyone else and explain all those data points into like the attack that happened or something like that. And that's kind of the fun part for me, is being able to stitch all those together. I used to write stories when I was a kid, and I don't write anything anymore, but now I write stories with malware, and that's kind of fun. So I like that a lot.
I love that image. What kind of stories did you write as a kid?
Silly stories,
Yeah.
Mostly fiction and superheroes and things like that. So
That's great. Do you ever see yourself mixing your two interests in writing about, you know, super cool cybersecurity superheroes, or?
that would be cool, but I don't think I would be a good enough writer.
No. What about you, Emily? What do you enjoy most about your job?
I have a similar love of my job that Jamila has. So I always wanted to be a detective growing up. I wanted to be a homicide detective. I'm not sure what little kid wants to be a homicide detective, but apparently I did. And but obviously that was not something that was going to pan out for me for numerous reasons. But I feel like my job now, like, I am a detective. That's what I do. I solve crimes, literally. The things that people are doing on with malware and whatever, you know, in cybersecurity, they're committing crimes, whether it's like financial crimes or even like espionage level crimes, like, and then it's my job to go in and find the pieces of evidence that I can tie together to say, you know, here's what they did, here's what the crime was, here's the evidence that I have to support that, and here's, you know, occasionally who done it. I mean, not necessarily to the level of the literal person, but to say maybe, you know, this nation state is behind it, and have that level of confidence to solve these crimes, for lack of a better term. And then on top of that, another thing I really love about my job is that I am always learning something new, which is a good thing and a bad thing, because it's not actually a bad thing. Let me rephrase. It's a good thing and it's a struggle as well, because it's the reason it's a struggle is because it is hard to ask for help, and it's hard to feel stupid, you know. It's hard to show up to work and be like, nope, I don't know how to do that, and to admit that. But at the end of the day, what that means is that when I say, no, I don't know how to do that, and someone says, cool, let me show you, now tomorrow I do know how to do that thing. And so constantly I'm growing and evolving and learning new things, and the next time that I have to solve another crime in the same way, I'll know how to do it. So I'm just I'm really happy that my job feels slightly over my head, even though I hope it's not, just because it means that I'm learning every single day.
Great. So Jamila, what are some of the most challenging parts about your job? What are the hard parts, or the days when you feel like, I don't know why I got into this?
I think there are definitely times where, because of the volume of extra learning that you always have to do, you always feel like you're a little slow, or you're not quite as fast as everyone else, or you're kind of worried that you're not able to keep up. And so it's something that puts a lot of pressure on at least my personal organizational skills, making sure that you can keep everything straight, that you can remember everything that needs doing for all these things that are happening all the time, all these cases, all these kind of indicators of compromise that you're looking into. So definitely organizational ability can sometimes have a pressure on. And I think there's also just like growing up with, like I said, a lot of stories of like superheroes and like fictional characters and stuff like that. There's this comparison that you always feel like the need to make yourself, where when you tell people what you do, they can often try and compare it to like you're like a super hacker or something. And so there's like, you got to stop comparing yourself to a fictional character, I guess, even though like when people hear your job title or they hear about what you do, like you even internalize it as a little bit yourself, and you're like, oh, I need to be at that level and be just like breaking into the Pentagon or something. And so I think there's that reality, coming to reality of like that you're just always learning, and that that you're doing okay. So I think that's probably the most challenging part. And then organization is hard.
That's great. Emily, what's the hardest part of your job?
Some days every aspect can feel a little bit like clawing your way uphill, especially coming into cybersecurity, you know, from a non-typical background, you know, having a degree in English. I did not work in technology before I got into cybersecurity. I am a woman, so there's two of us on my team. And so like, it's just kind of, it can feel a little overwhelming at times to be like, trust me, I'm right. Like I know what I'm doing. And I think that most of the time, the person I'm trying to convince is actually myself. And that's why it can be so hard, because it's really difficult to convince yourself that you're worthy, or at least it's difficult for me to convince myself that I'm worthy. And I think that I can hold myself back in that regard, but it can be difficult for me to trust myself. So what that means is that, you know, I want to solve these mysteries like we were talking about. I want to be this detective who gets to the end result. But because I am clawing my way uphill, sometimes I feel like if I don't like within 5 minutes get like, oh, I found him, I found the bad guy, he did it right here. Like if I don't get to that point super fast, I feel like a failure. And so there are some days that are just exhausting when, you know, you look through all the data, you're not always going to get an answer. And it can make me feel like I've done something wrong, but really it's not. I'm not doing anything wrong. I just need to, you know, keep learning. Or sometimes there is no answer, and that needs to be okay. So I think really just convincing myself that I am good at my job is the first step. And then also it can be really difficult to not always be able to like have that nice, pretty package where I wrap it in a bow and say, I did it. Here's the thing. It's done. I found the bad guy. Like, it's not always going to be like that.
Yeah, that's something that I found in the research too, is that women are harder on themselves than men are. And they're much harder on themselves in IT, right? And then because they don't necessarily feel like they belong. And that's just so hard and heartbreaking. Even women, they would do all these studies where, women would score higher on tests, but still then grade themselves harsher than the men in their classmates, right? They would have a higher level of mastery, but their assumption of their level of mastery would be lower, which is, that's hard. It's hard. So that leads me into my next question. Jamila, what's something that you would like to share with women who are entering IT? What's some piece of advice or things that you have experienced as a woman that could be beneficial for other people to hear?
I think to start, I think any background that you have that you're bringing in, there is a role in kind of IT or security or something that you can fill, and that whatever background that you're bringing is incredibly valuable to bring in. So I would definitely caution against that. When you first start taking classes or you first start researching stuff, you're always going to have classmates that sound like they know everything. It's really hard to ignore them. But if you take like 3 classes with them, you quickly realize that that's not the case. So it's difficult to push past, but that part, at least, like there's, especially in like the early 1 and 2 level classes, like there will always be a few people that like have acted like they've been putting stuff together, like, and tinkering with stuff since they were like 3 years old. That's fine. That's not a disadvantage at all to not be doing that, and don't worry about that. I would also say, just like coming into the field, and this is for women, but also just for anyone in general, there is a lot of kind of ethical issues that you run into when you do work in data and you are kind of a steward of sensitive data, and you, especially in security, but in IT in general, you often have a lot of access, and you often sometimes are asked to do things that you can and should push back on, and should like make sure that when you're coming in to research those things and speak out against them, when they come up, and just make sure that that's something that you always are aware of, I guess. It's a weird way of phrasing it, but.
No, I think you're saying it's going to be important to be brave, right? Because there's going to be challenges.
Yeah, and it's always, I think, hard in your first few jobs and things like that, because it is, there are issues of like, it is a very male-dominated field. And I know for my first job that I had, there were some experiences that in hindsight, I understand like why I didn't like quit or like speak up more and stuff like that. But it's one of those things where it's just like, now that stuff just wouldn't fly. So I think just be prepared that that is a reality. It's changing, but there are also like lots of other, every time you do encounter like bad bosses or like situations where people say things to you like you don't belong here, or like, what are you doing? That there are places that will appreciate you.
Yeah, I've always thought that it's the company being silly to like not open themselves up to all of this amazing talent, right? Yeah. What about you, Emily? What about your experiences?
I was going to say something very similar. I think that one of the things that I would say to women who are entering cybersecurity is that don't let people tell you no. And that person trying to tell you no might be yourself. It might be a boss. It might be a coworker. I have, in the past worked for people who told me like, no, you're not going to be an analyst. You have an English degree. Or who I frequently, would be told no kind of by not being told yes. And that I might be working on something, but the email about that thing goes to my male coworker and I'm just, oops, not on it. That kind of stuff happens a lot. But what you need to do is just not take no for an answer. When you get told, no, you're not going to be an analyst because you're a woman or whatever, you say, no, actually I am. And you go find somewhere that will let you be an analyst, and you work until you find someone who says yes. Or when you you get left out of projects because you were conveniently the only woman and were forgotten. You insert yourself into that project and you show up to the meeting that you weren't invited to anyway, and you do the work until they can't tell you no anymore. Because at some point you're going to find someone who's going to say yes, and then even if that person is you and you're the only one saying yes, they're not going to be able to ignore you. So that's what I would say.
I love that. I love showing up for a meeting you're not invited to. I've done
I've
that
done
as well.
that.
What about you, Jamila? Do you remember that moment where you felt like you belonged?
Um, I think the moment that I kind of broke through that, and I think I'm still trying to find, like, I guess, quote unquote, like my community and stuff like that. But I think the moment I felt like I really belonged in the field was, I think at probably, there was a time at my first job where I basically was in a meeting with somebody and they were proposing this new project that they were doing. And I had been doing a lot of like threat investigations for all sorts of different security events and things like that. And they were proposing this project that was basically going in the face of like everything that I had researched. And I was like, hey, and I spoke up and I was like, hey, if you like do this, all of this will get worse. And I have all of this evidence to prove that. And there was kind of everybody else was just like, yeah, that's right. And I think when that happened, I was just like, wait, you guys listen to me? Okay. So because I was like, it was that moment where it just kind of clicked and I was just listening idly to these meetings and these emails. And I was just like, yeah, it doesn't add up. Doesn't add up that this is going on with all this other stuff over here. And I think that was when I think after that moment, I've been a lot more confident in just like standing up for what I know and the research that I've done, and really like embracing the idea that like if I've done research on something, that I should be confident in what I produced and confident enough to speak up when my research validates or invalidates statements other people are doing, and also break past the idea that like when you bring something up that people are suddenly going to like always just like yell at you or yell you down or something like that. And that did happen before that, and other instances where you bring something up and then people are just like, oh, what? No. But I think that was kind of a turning point for me when I realized that like, oh wait, like I am good at this, and this is kind of where I belong in this field.
That's awesome. What about you, Emily? Do you remember that moment where you felt like you belonged?
I am trying to think, and I think there's been a couple of moments where I felt like I belonged. In particular, I think the first one that really came to mind was after I left my first company, and I was interviewing for threat intelligence jobs, for cybersecurity jobs outside of that company. I really thought that I was not going to have any success because it was my first company, where I had been hired as a technical writer, and they were the ones that moved me into analyst and all this stuff. And a part of me felt like, oh, well, the only reason that, I ended up in this job is because I basically had a 1.5 year long interview. It was when I was doing the job as a tech writer and like building up the skills, and I was working with these people day to day. And that's the only reason I got the job. And once I leave this company, everyone's going to see that actually I'm an idiot and I don't know what I'm doing, and nobody's going to hire me. And lo and behold, they did hire me. And I like did the regular interview process and got hired on with a regular company that did cybersecurity. And it was kind of a moment of like, wait a minute, I don't have to like prove myself over the course of a year to these people for them to think I know what I'm doing. Like they'll actually just hire me and like pay me to do this job. This is crazy. So that was like one of the first moments where I really felt like I did belong. But I definitely struggle with imposter syndrome, and Kim mentioned imposter syndrome earlier. I struggle with it majorly, to the point where like even after I started my job, I get hired and stuff, part of me it's like waiting for like the shoe to drop, where I'm like, oh god, eventually all these people are going to find out that I don't know what I'm doing. It's like I literally do the job on a daily basis, but I still kind of struggle with that feeling of like being dumber than everyone around me, or like somehow everyone knows significantly more than me. So I think in that regard, I'm still constantly having to find more moments where I feel like I belong, because every time I do, I talk myself out of it a little bit. And I think that's normal. I hope that's normal. Maybe it's not just me, but I think that's pretty normal. And that's also why it's really important to make other people feel like they belong, because you kind of kind of had to wonder, like, if I'm feeling like this, is everyone else feeling like this? And kind of like bringing up the people around you is a good way to bring yourself up and make yourself feel more included and involved by making everybody realize that they're also included and involved. So that was a little convoluted, but hopefully that made sense.
I think it totally makes sense. I think we all feel like imposters sometimes. Yeah. And it's great to see like all of you who are very accomplished all feeling that way sometimes, right? So then it kind of invalidates that in some ways when you can reflect out and see how other people are. Emily, maybe as a follow-up though, what's something you wish you would have known earlier in your career?
I think I would have wished I knew earlier in my career that the skills referred to as soft skills, which I'm just going to throw out that I hate that terminology and I wish we would all abandon it and come out with something better, are extremely important. And I spent a lot of time like apologizing for my background basically and being like, oh, I'm so sorry that I'm not like, I don't have a degree in software engineering or whatever. And I'm just a lowly English degree person, you know, like I spent a lot of time apologizing for that. But I think it's actually a strength because I learned the other stuff. I learned the technology aspect of my job. I learn it every day. I managed to do it. And it is pretty rare to come across someone in my field who took the time to go out and learn the other side of things, which is learning how to write and learning how to speak and learning how to do all of the things that I already know how to do because I already learned those things. So I think that it's important to not downplay the abilities that set you apart, even if they make you feel like you're different. Sometimes being different can be good. So yes, I think that the thing I wish I would have known earlier in my career, that being different is good. I spent a lot of time trying to fit in, but really what I was doing was hiding some of the attributes that made me stand out.
Great. What about you, Jamila? What's something you wish you would have known?
I think I wish I would have known two two things, like the amount of writing I think that is involved, no matter whether you're in operations or engineering or analysis or kind of threat hunting. Like there is a very severe amount of kind of writing, communicating, and translating kind of what you're saying into various different formats for various different audiences. I think for myself, I still presently struggle a lot with anxiety around um, kind of sending emails and writing stuff and making sure that it looks perfect before it's done. And I think if I had put more emphasis on that when I was younger and going to school, or if there was more emphasis on that, I think I would have gotten a lot more comfortable with not only creating an essay or a documentation like that, but doing it very regularly so that it's really practiced, so that you're not in the field and you realize that you have to write a paper every other day or every day, or multiple papers, and you're not kind of used to that quick writing talent. And then I also think I wish if somebody else had told me more about the negative experiences that they have had in the field, really honestly. I think that starting out, especially for my first job, I had no frame of reference and I didn't really have a community of other people in cybersecurity to talk to. And a lot of times, no one was necessarily talking about the negative experiences they were having with their managers or their teams, or so it was hard to know that it was actually unique, any experiences that I was having. So a lot of times I think I just kind of ignored it and I was just like, this is just kind of how it is when you start out. When you start out, you just kind of put up with this for a few years and you don't really worry about it and you look at the good parts. And then I didn't realize until much later, like 2 or 3 years later, talking to a team and like laughingly explaining to them some of the silly situations I ended up finding myself in the first year. And they were like, everyone got quiet. And I was like, oh, was that not happening to everybody? Oh, weird, sorry. So I think just having people be a lot more open about kind of the more sensitive topics about like, hey, what negative experiences are you having with people? What have people said to you? Or to even people being a lot more open about their salaries and things they make. I know that in my very first job, I found out like halfway through one of them that I was making the not only the least on the team, but doing what everyone else was making, but I was making probably about 60% less than the next lowest person on the team, which I was already doing all of their work for. But there were people on the team making nearly double. And people being really open about their salaries and being really open about kind of the things that people don't like to talk about, I think really helps when you're in those first few jobs out of college or even considering a field. so that you kind of get a more realistic picture of it.
That's great. Yeah, and hard to hear, right? So this can be kind of a final question here. What's something that you're really proud of? Like, what's an accomplishment that you've had in your current job or a previous job that, when you think about it, it like fills you with pride?
The most succinct thing that I'm proud of is some research that I'm a very private person, so I don't really have any social media or anything else, but I've been trying to do more outward research and things like that. And some research that I did on malicious Chrome extensions got published earlier this year in February, and it got a really positive response. And I was really, really anxious before that went out that I was like, oh, I did this research a long time ago now at this point. Maybe it's not good. Maybe I didn't go deep enough on it. And so I think the positive response and just like having something out there that I can point to and I can just be like, hey, look, I did this, really gave me a lot of confidence to be like, oh, okay, I can do more research on my own and I can do more research and I have something to show for it kind of in a way where even if I wasn't at Microsoft tomorrow or if I wasn't at another company tomorrow, I'd be like, okay, I have something I did and I'm pretty proud of it. And yeah, so I think I recently did some research on malicious Chrome extensions and uncovering kind of a network of them that were on the Chrome Web Store that resulted in a takedown of a lot of them. And so I was really proud of that.
Jamila, do your colleagues know about your publication?
I think so. I think that's why they hired me, or part of it. So, because they brought it up in the interview, so I think they at least did their research.
That's awesome. What about you, Emily? What's something you're really proud of?
That's a tough question, and one that as I'm thinking, I'm realizing probably shouldn't be as tough. Maybe I should know what I'm proud of, but for some reason it's very difficult. But there were two things that I thought of, and both of them are pretty small, so I'm going to mention them both. The first one, when I was still working as a technical writer, I got a certification. It was one of those generalized basic cybersecurity certifications, but it included a lot. I had to study a lot. There was a lot of technical questions on the test, and I had been told that I wasn't going to pass it, and which was like motivation to pass it, and I did. And that was several years ago. And so the reason that it took me a while to think of that one is because I don't really talk about that. Like, it's not one of those things I don't meet people. I'm like, hi, I'm Emily Hacker, and look at these certifications I have. Like, I don't feel the need to do that anymore. But at the time, it was something I was really proud of because it was really like the only evidence I had, if you will, that I could prove to other people, like, no, look, I do know what I'm talking about. I got the certification. So that's one thing I'm really proud of. But now that I've moved a little further along in my career and I don't necessarily feel like I have to have letters behind my name, if you will, in order to prove that I know what I'm doing. One of the things that I'm most proud of is finding ways to use the things I've learned in my career, but for different things or for better things. So there's an organization called Trace Labs. I don't know if y'all have heard of them, but they use volunteer OSINT analysts to find missing persons or to help find missing persons. And I participated in their Capture the Flag last year at DEF CON, and my team actually placed really well. I wrote a blog about it, and the blog went all over the internet, and it was kind of fun. And now in my spare time, that's something that I kind of keep up with. Wow, could I find anything? Could I help these people? And I think that that was actually something I was really proud of, doing that, participating in that. And kind of, it's almost like the opposite then, because before I used to be proud of being able to say oh, look, I have a certification. I can prove that I can do the same thing as all of y'all. And now years later, I'm able to take a step back and realize that the thing that I'm most proud of is let me take a step back from this industry, but use these same kind of skills and see how I can apply them differently to help other people in a way that isn't being done as often. So kind of that well-roundedness is something, I guess, that I'm proud of. So
that's great. Thank you. Well, I just wanted to thank all of you. Is there anything else, anything that's bubbled up that you want to share? We have just a couple minutes left.
Sure. I just wanted to reiterate, I think we've talked about it a lot today already, but just like if you are pursuing a career in this, just like really be proud of like all of the other perspectives that you bring, and be interested in taking classes or look for cybersecurity programs that offer, you know, the ability to take more classes in the humanities to make sure, because really everything that you can bring in is going to be helpful, it's going to be useful, and it's going to offer new perspectives. Um, and I think, like Emily said, there's a lot of ways to apply cybersecurity skills, the technical skills, to any area outside of just working for a tech company. So from learning new languages, philosophy and ethics, or learning about different cultural backgrounds different from your own, it's all going, there's always going to be a time when that's going to be useful in the context of technology as well, just because it's so ubiquitous. And I guess if we're plugging organizations, one organization that was really helpful for me, that where a lot of the people I met there gave me a lot of good advice about, you know, whether to go straight to work or go to school or not, was ICMCP. I mentioned it earlier, and I'll just drop it in the chat, their website. But I think they have a yearly conference and also membership and mentoring as well for women and minorities in cybersecurity. And so that was really helpful for me, and a good way to meet other people in the industry.
Wonderful. All right. Well, we are at time. It has been so wonderful to get to meet you all. I just feel so privileged to be able to spend this hour with you all. So thank you so much for your time. It really is invaluable and inspiring.